Her phone froze in a hotel downtown. She returned from a hotel glowing. Jane's heart raced as she saw, with brutal clarity, the life she thought she knew had quietly been dismantled. Elias sat on the edge of the bed in his apartment on the top floor of an old building in Chicago, 2024. The pale orange light of dawn filtered through the glass facades of the neighboring skyscrapers, washing the room in a muted, almost sterile glow. Jane's side of the bed was perfectly made, every sheet and blanket smooth and taut, as if her presence had been nothing more than a careful illusion. The phone on the nightstand remained silent, the screen empty of notifications, and the GPS showed her location frozen in the downtown parking lot of a luxury hotel. Elias did not shout, did not reach for anyone to call. Instead, a strange, icy clarity settled over him, a realization that the life they had painstakingly built together had ended abruptly and irrevocably. He felt the weight of that truth in his chest, sharp and unmoving, and moved with deliberate slowness as he rose. Every step toward the closet, every motion as he opened drawers and folded clothes, carried the precision of someone reclaiming only what was indisputably his, leaving behind everything that had been shared, everything that had defined their life together. The apartment smelled faintly of lingering perfume, faint and sweet, mingling with the cold scent of early morning air and the faint trace of last night's rain. Elias paused at the edge of the kitchen island, his eyes tracing the marble countertop, the way the light caught the edges of a coffee mug left unwashed. He felt the strange emptiness of the room pressing against him, a physical force that seemed to confirm the severing of all ties. His movements were methodical, unhurried, but irrevocable. Each item he packed into his bag was a small act of reclaiming, a silent testament to boundaries now drawn, a life quietly severed at its foundation. Time seemed suspended, each second magnifying the stillness of the apartment, each breath echoing against the high ceilings and polished hardwood floors. Outside, the city awoke slowly, unaware of the fracture that had occurred in the quiet, dimly lit space above the streets. Elias's eyes lingered on the window, on the streets below, on the tiny movement of a lone pedestrian crossing Michigan Avenue. He felt nothing but the clear, precise certainty that everything had changed, and that change was absolute. He returned to the bag, folding one last shirt with meticulous care, his hand steady despite the storm of thought beneath the surface. In that quiet morning, amidst the faint hum of the city and the distant rumble of traffic, he moved with the calm inevitability of someone witnessing the end of a world he had helped construct, gathering only what belonged to him, leaving the rest to the silence. In the kitchen, Elias left a note on a thick sheet of cream-colored stationery, placing beside it the key Jane had once entrusted to him. The electronic lock clicked shut behind him, sealing the apartment in an almost oppressive silence. Every sound in the empty space seemed magnified, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the subtle creak of the hardwood floor under his shoes, the distant echo of early morning traffic filtering through the double-glass windows. Jane returned later, her footsteps reverberating off the walls, each echo a reminder of a ritual that had vanished. There was no morning coffee brewing, no warmth emanating from the Nespresso machine on the counter, no hum of conversation or the usual small domestic noises that had filled the apartment. Her phone lay silent, inert, unresponsive, reflecting the immobility of the life she had assumed would continue as always. The closets were emptied of carefully arranged clothing, the order she had once taken for granted now disrupted to a meticulous degree, leaving only items of no consequence. The bed was made perfectly, taut and smooth, and the scent of her presence mingled with the lingering cold air, an intangible ghost that emphasized her absence. Elias had moved with precise deliberation, each motion calculated to restore his own boundaries while leaving nothing unnecessary behind. He accessed their shared financial accounts, transferring exactly half of the liquid assets into his personal account, dormant until this moment. He froze her credit cards, leaving untouched only what she could legally use without alarming others, each step methodical, efficient, unclouded by anger or sentiment. His movements were almost ritualistic. He organized receipts, labeled folders, reviewed statements and transactions, confirming details of her whereabouts through hotel charges and GPS coordinates. Nothing was left to chance, nothing allowed for reinterpretation. Every action was precise, cold, and absolute. The apartment, once a shared universe of small gestures, laughter, and familiar clutter, had become a controlled space of absence, silence, and evidence. It was a world reordered by his hands, a world in which Jane was confronted for the first time with the scope of what had changed, the scale of what had been silently undone. Outside the windows, the city pressed on, oblivious, while inside, order and disappearance coexisted as two sides of the same immutable law, a law enforced with calm inevitability and the stark logic of someone reclaiming agency from the ruins of trust. Jane wandered through the apartment, each step amplifying the hollow emptiness that had replaced the life she had known, the warmth she associated with comfort, the status she had used as a shield, the control she had wielded over small details. All of it dissolved into an unbearable void. She ran her hands over the furniture, brushing against the smooth surfaces of tables and the spines of books, tracing objects that had once been mundane, now transformed into symbols of absence. The apartment's silence pressed in on her from every angle, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rattle of the air conditioning becoming deafening reminders of what had been stripped away. Her phone remained inert, calls unanswered, messages unreceived, as though the world had deliberately cut off the channel she had relied upon for reassurance. Every reflective surface, polished floors, glass panes, the gleam of marble countertops, caught the morning light and mirrored back the tension coiled in her chest. Shadows stretched across the walls, elongating with her pacing, bending her perception of space, echoing her escalating panic. The familiar rhythm of domestic life, the sound of a coffee machine, the shuffle of morning routines, the distant city noises, was absent, leaving only stark, oppressive stillness. Jane's hands shook as she touched objects that no longer carried their comforting associations. The sheets on the bed, once a shared ritual of rest, were taut and smooth, empty of the weight of human presence. The closets, stripped of carefully curated clothing, revealed outlines of absence in the dust, a meticulous record of what had been taken. Every step she took through the apartment heightened the clarity of her new reality. There would be no explanations, no rehearsed apologies, no return to normalcy. The consequences of her actions, the hotel, the betrayals, the lies, had materialized in tangible, irreversible ways. The apartment, once a sanctuary and stage for her manipulation, had become a courtroom in which she was both defendant and witness, confronted with the stark fact that her world had shifted, and she alone was responsible for navigating the ruins. The panic that surged through her veins was tempered only by the undeniable truth reflected in every surface around her. Order and presence had been stripped away with surgical precision. Jane moved through the empty rooms as if navigating a maze designed by someone who knew her every weakness, each step forcing recognition that comfort and privilege could not shield her from consequence. For the first time, she understood that her actions carried weight beyond rehearsal, beyond negotiation, and that the life she thought she controlled had been irrevocably dismantled by a calm, deliberate force. The apartment was no longer a home. It was a stark monument to reality, and she had no choice but to face it. Ilias settled into a small hotel room in the heart of the city, the constant hum of traffic outside filtering through the thin walls, distant and almost abstract, a background rhythm that felt removed from his own internal order. He positioned himself at the desk, the laptop screen glowing against the dim ambient light, rows of numbers and spreadsheets stretching across the display. Every transaction, every financial record, every document he reviewed was examined with clinical precision. He moved with the steady, deliberate calm of someone whose world had contracted into the parameters he could measure and control. Decisions were not made on impulse. Each action was calculated, each choice weighed for consequence and necessity. The room was sparse, functional, unadorned, an environment that reflected his state of mind, minimalist, disciplined, entirely his own. Meanwhile, Jane immersed herself in the glittering surface of the social world. She attended gallery openings, charity events, and evening receptions, moving through crowds that smiled, laughed, and clinked glasses, but their energy failed to penetrate the emptiness that had settled around her. The conversations felt rehearsed, the laughter hollow, the decor meticulously curated yet devoid of substance. Without Elias, the social rituals, the performances she had perfected, the costumes of civility and charm, all carried a stark artificiality. The applause and compliments were merely echoes against a vacuum, unable to fill the widening void within her. The contrast between them was brutal and unmistakable. The Laius operated within a precise, rational framework, a controlled microcosm where everything was accounted for and predictable. Each step reinforced his autonomy. Each movement reaffirmed the boundaries he had established. Jane, on the other hand, moved through a world crowded with people yet completely empty of connection, her influence diminished, her presence unnoticed beyond the superficial recognition of her social rank. She navigated the glittering events with poise, but inside, a gnawing anxiety pulsed, a persistent awareness that the carefully constructed narratives she relied upon could no longer shield her from the consequences of her choices. Their worlds existed in parallel, close in geography yet miles apart in substance and reality. He found clarity in the silence of his measured isolation. She found dissonance in the noise of her hollow engagements. Every sip of champagne, every whispered compliment, every staged smile contrasted sharply with the precision and inevitability of his detached, methodical control. The emptiness in her life expanded with each passing hour, mirrored by the focused calm of his own world, a world rebuilt in the image of his reason, his patience, and his unwavering assertion of agency. The gap between them was no longer simply emotional. It had become structural, a chasm defined by order versus illusion, presence versus absence, consequence versus performance. Jane discovered a folder on Elias's desk, its weight understated but commanding attention. Inside, she found letters meticulously drafted and plans carefully outlined for the coming year. Each page revealed a trajectory she had never considered. He intended to take a sabbatical, rent a studio on the Michigan shoreline, and dedicate himself to rebuilding what remained of their relationship. Every decision was mapped with precision, designed to restore trust and preserve the foundation of their family. A timeline crafted to salvage what she had believed was irrevocably lost. The clarity of his intentions struck her like a physical blow, a forceful confrontation with the truth she had ignored. As she turned each page, the magnitude of her actions settled heavily upon her. It was not only the betrayal and lies that weighed on her conscience, but the realization that she had obliterated a path to salvation before it had even fully taken shape. The life Elias had envisioned was one she could have participated in, yet her impulsive choices had rendered it inaccessible. She understood then that his departure and meticulous actions were not motivated by anger, resentment, or revenge. They were manifestations of discipline, self-respect, and an unwavering commitment to his own moral compass. His world was constructed with care, each step deliberate, measured, and free of the chaos she had brought into their shared life. The apartment, once a vibrant stage for their routines, now appeared transformed into a museum of failure. Every object, every book, piece of furniture, and photograph seemed to catalog her missteps, a silent testament to the consequences of her actions. The letters and plans on the desk, the blueprint of intentions and structure, acted as a mirror reflecting her own absence of foresight. She wandered the room slowly, each step echoing against the polished floors, feeling the hollow resonance of opportunity wasted. The security, warmth, and agency she had taken for granted were replaced by emptiness, and every familiar sight now carried the weight of irrevocable loss. Jane realized, in the quiet oppression of that space, that the devastation she felt was not imposed externally. Elias had not shattered her world with malice. It was she who had undermined the structure of trust and possibility. The ruin surrounding her was self-inflicted, the consequence of choices made in fleeting desire and careless disregard. She could trace the blueprint of recovery he had drafted, could see the scaffolding of patience and strategy, and yet it was entirely beyond her reach. The clarity was excruciating, a revelation that the security she once relied upon was never a guarantee, and the protection of her life with Elias had been contingent on her own restraint and engagement, both of which she had abandoned. Every corner of the apartment spoke to her new reality. Order had been restored, but she was no longer part of it. Elias's meticulous withdrawal left her exposed, isolated within the very walls that once represented comfort and shared life. The juxtaposition of his calm, controlled world with her own internal chaos created a cognitive fracture. a recognition that stability and ruin could coexist in the same physical space, divided only by the discipline of one person and the impulsivity of another. She moved through the rooms with slow, deliberate steps, each object a silent accusation, each detail a reminder of the fragility of trust. In that realization, the full extent of her loss crystallized, and she understood that the life she had taken for granted was not merely suspended. It was dismantled, leaving only the ruins of what could have been. The divorce concluded with the precise rhythm of notary stamps and legal formalities, each signature falling into place with unerring accuracy. Elias moved through the process with measured calm, his hands steady, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, the motions devoid of emotional turbulence. He did not glance at Jane, who remained seated across the table, her presence a muted echo in the sterile, sunlit room. Every paper he signed was a deliberate severing of past ties, a methodical dismantling of the shared life they had once inhabited. The ritual was quiet, almost clinical, but its finality was unmistakable. Jane lingered in the apartment afterward, the space immaculate and undisturbed. Everything she had once cherished, the furniture, the art, the carefully curated objects of taste, remained exactly where she had left it, yet the vitality that had defined the home was gone. The apartment was a shrine to appearances, a perfect but lifeless reflection of the world she believed she controlled. The silence pressed against her with a weight she could not lift, and for the first time, she understood that ownership of material beauty could not substitute for presence, integrity, or strength of character. The house was hers in every external sense, but it was hollow, a museum dedicated to absence and loss. Elias stepped outside. The city streets of Chicago sprawled before him in a tapestry of wet asphalt, neon reflections, and early morning mist. He slid into his car, the engine thrumming beneath him like a heartbeat of freedom long denied. He did not chart a precise course. The destination was irrelevant. For the first time in years, he was unbound, unpressured by expectations, and unshackled from compromises that had once defined his daily existence. Each turn of the wheel was an affirmation of self-possession, a small, deliberate act of reclaiming autonomy. The city passed in a blur of gray and gold, the chill of rain mingling with the crisp morning air, invigorating and clarifying. Jane watched from the apartment windows as the car disappeared into the traffic, her reflection overlapping the Rain Street cityscape. The knowledge of what she had lost settled over her in layers, dense and unyielding. Her illusions of control, status, and comfort were meaningless in the absence of the person who had been the axis of her life. Material possessions, once sources of pride, now seemed inert, incapable of sustaining the vitality she had once believed they conveyed. She felt the weight of emptiness settle into her chest, a steady, undeniable presence, as if the apartment itself exhaled in recognition of her isolation. Meanwhile, Elias moved through the streets with a sense of deliberate liberation. Each block passed beneath his wheels like a measure of time reclaimed, a life unfolded anew. The rain reflected streetlights and rising sun in shifting patterns, mirroring the fluidity of his unencumbered state. He did not dwell on loss or betrayal, only on the clarity of purpose that had guided his decisions, the quiet confidence in the knowledge that he had acted with integrity and self-respect. Freedom was not a destination. It was the conscious exercise of choice, a principle he now embodied fully. By the time the sun climbed higher, the city had begun its daily rhythm. Yet Elias remained separate from the turbulence. He navigated through streets, familiar yet freshly rendered, each movement a reaffirmation of agency. Jane remained behind, enclosed in the perfect stillness of a home emptied of warmth, her victories hollow, her authority untested by the demands of consequence. The divergence of their worlds was complete. He embraced autonomy and moral clarity. She contended with the unrelenting weight of absence and reflection. In the quiet harmony of resolution, Chicago's morning unfolded around them, a canvas for contrasting realities. The rain, the light, and the wet pavements reflected not chaos, but the consequence of choice, marking an ending for one and a beginning for the other. Elias moved forward into a space unclaimed, uncharted, and alive, while Jane remained ensnared in the carefully preserved remnants of a life that no longer existed, the moral certainty of his freedom underscoring the emptiness of hers. The chapter closed without fanfare or spectacle. its resonance found in the stillness, in the deliberate clarity of endings, and in the austere, inexorable birth of new autonomy.